A 1.6 out of 10, that's the now infamous score one of the world's most notorious music publications gave this band's debut album, calling them a clumsy and unforgivable imitation of Led Zeppelin. They were labeled an embarrassment, a pastiche, even half-baked boomer fetishism. The criticism was so swift and so brutal, it really became a story in itself. But while the critics sharpened their knives, something else was happening. This very same band was selling out venues all across the world. Their albums were topping the Billboard rock charts. They won a Grammy, and a whole new generation of young fans who weren't even alive for the golden age of rock and roll started calling them its new saviors. So which one is it? Is this the most critically reviled young rock band of the modern era? Are they rock's biggest ripoff, just a soulless group cashing in on a formula written 50 years ago? Or in an era that's been starved for new rock gods, is this the very thing people hate about them? That uncanny, undeniable familiarity, the secret to their wild success? And maybe, just maybe, they're rock's only hope for the future. From the moment their breakout single Highway Tune hit the airwaves back in 2017, the comparison was instantaneous and, well, unavoidable. Led Zeppelin. And this wasn't just a case of subtle influence, it was like a direct duplication. The soaring, acrobatic wall of vocalist Josh Kiska, a dead ringer for a young Robert Plant. The swaggering blues-drenched guitar riffs from his twin brother Jake feel like they were pulled directly from Jimmy Page's songbook. And the rhythm section with the pair's brother Sam on bass and Danny Wagner on drums provides that same thunderous heavy groove that defined John Paul Jones and John Bonham. It was all there, the dramatic shifts in dynamics, the fantasy-inspired lyrics, the very sonic nature of the recordings. It sounded like a lost tape from 1971. And for a whole legion of critics, that was exactly the problem. The backlash wasn't just a few disgruntled comments on YouTube. It was a firestorm of criticism. The peak of this outrage really came in 2018 with Pitchfork's review of their debut album, Anthem of the Peaceful Army. The critic Jeremy Larson awarded it an eye-opening 1.6 out of 10. He wrote that the band mollycoddled every impulse of late 60s rock and roll into an interminable 49-minute drag. He described them not as students of their idols, but as a band that sounds exactly like they did weed exactly once, calling the cops and then trying to record a Led Zeppelin album. That review went viral. It became a meme, and it was validation for anyone who saw the band as being inauthentic. And it became the main argument against the group. While most bands wear their influences on their sleeves, they still create something new from their influences rather than being a pure clone. One critic for the Scripps Voice put it more bluntly, calling the band an embarrassment for rock and arguing that listeners should just go listen to the real Led Zeppelin instead. Others called the band a Temu version of Led Zeppelin. This argument actually goes deeper than just how they sound. It taps into a real fear about where rock music is headed. Is this the future? A future where originality is dead and success is found by creating what one writer called an algorithmic franchise, a band so perfectly nostalgic it feels like it was generated by a computer to satisfy a craving for the past. Now, critics argued that the band's rapid rise was a symptom of the sick industry itself. Here were four kids from Michigan who, after playing some biker bars and local clubs, were whisked away by a major label, Lava Records, before they really had time to develop their own unique identity. Unlike bands who spend years on the road absorbing all kinds of different influences and forging their own sound in small empty rooms, Greta Van Fleet was polished, packaged, and presented to the world as a finished product, a product that looked and sounded conveniently like one of the most beloved, influential, and commercially successful bands of all time. And this soon led to whispers of them being an industry plant, a charge that, while largely unfounded it seems, really spoke to the suspicion around their meteoric success. It felt a little too perfect and a little too clean. The criticism wasn't just that they sounded like Led Zeppelin, but that they represented a creative dead end. They were seen as a shallow spectacle for an audience that, as one critic harshly put it, engages in little critical thinking. In this view, Greta Van Fleet isn't just a bad band, they're a symbol of rock stagnation, a group that basically profits from nostalgia without adding a single new idea. They are, in the eyes of its detractors, the ultimate ripoff. The members themselves have spoken about their influences. The brothers, after all, grew up in a house with a father who played a lot of blues artists, with the members also highlighting Cream and the Rolling Stones, as well as John Denver, Peter, Paul and Mary, Bob Dylan, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, in addition to, of course, Led Zeppelin, as being key influences. As for what the members of Led Zeppelin themselves have said about the group, only Robert Plant has publicly commented on them.
Up-and-coming rock and roll bands that you really, really rate?
There's a band in Detroit called Greta Van Fleet. They are Led Zeppelin 1.
Yep.
It's like The kid looks like he's just dropped out of a kind of beautiful little singer.
Yes.
Very smart.
I've seen them.
Yeah.
They're really, really young.
Yeah.
I've seen him. And
I hate him.
he has got such a huge voice, that young fella, the
and
front
he
man.
borrowed it from somebody I know very well. Yeah. But I mean, what are you going to do? It's okay.
Do you know? Has he tried to meet you? Has he been requests?
No. I mean, at least he's got a bit of style, because he said he based his whole style on Aerosmith.
Jason Bonham has also discussed the group, wishing them the best of luck, but also stating that at the same age that the members of Greta Van Fleet are at, Robert Plant had a better singing voice. The band has won over some well-respected rock stars, including Elton John, who actually invited the band to perform at his annual Oscars party for the Elton John AIDS Foundation. At the time, John called Greta Van Fleet the best rock and roll he's heard in decades, stating, "They blew me away." So you're going to see them here, and they're going to be one of the biggest new bands of the year. They have an amazing future ahead of them. I'm so thankful for them to come on stage and play for you. That's what he stated when he introduced them at the event. Alice Cooper has also sung their praises, as has Ted Nugent and Joe Satriani. Slash has also praised them. But what if the story isn't about what the critics actually think? What if it's about what the audience feels? While the ink was still drying on those scathing reviews, Greta Van Fleet was doing something almost no new rock bands have managed to do in the last several years. They were getting massively, undeniably popular. Let's rewind the clock a bit, back before the major label deal and these sold-out shows. Let's go back to Michigan. Here, the Kiska brothers, Josh, Jake, and Sam, along with their friend Danny Wagner, were just kids cutting their teeth the old-fashioned way. They started out as a garage band that grew up into a bar band. Their proving grounds weren't curated festival stages, but gritty, honest venues, sports bars, biker joints, and motorcycle clubs across the heartland. These gigs helped them hone in the late 60s rock sound because that's the music they grew up on and loved. And they were playing for crowds that loved it too. The origin story doesn't really paint the picture of an industry fabrication. Their big break came in 2017 with the single Highway Tune, which went to #1 on the Billboard Mainstream Rock Tracks chart and stayed there for 4 weeks straight. Their debut album, which came out the following year, the very same one Pitchfork had eviscerated, debuted at #1 on the Billboard Rock, Hard Rock, and Top Album Sales chart. Their second EP, From the Fires, won the 2019 Grammy Award for Best Rock Album, and their later albums, The Battle at Gardens Gate and Starcatcher, also secured Grammy nominations and high chart positions. At a time when rock music has been largely absent from the mainstream cultural conversation, which has been dominated by pop and hip-hop, Greta Van Fleet was selling out world tours, and in 1 week in 2021 alone, their catalog saw a 122% boost in streams, racking up over 7.6 million plays. And this is really the core of the counter-argument. You can't fake this level of success. An audience can tell the difference between a cheap copy and the real deal. And for millions of people, Greta Van Fleet is the real deal. The argument here is that the critics are totally missing the point. They're so caught up in the game of spot the influence that they're ignoring the raw talent and visceral power of the music itself. To sound like Led Zeppelin is one thing, but to do it well, that's another thing entirely. It takes a huge amount of musical skill. Josh Kiska's voice, often dismissed as a mere imitation, is technically impressive. Vocal coaches online have broken down his technique and highlighted his control range and the soaring high notes in songs like Highway Tune. The defenders of Greta Van Fleet argue that all artists have influences. The Beatles, after all, were obsessed with Chuck Berry and Little Richard. The Rolling Stones built their entire sound on the foundation of American blues. Did anyone dismiss them as mere copycats? No, they were seen as carrying a torch, reinterpreting a tradition for a new generation. And this, like Greta Van Fleet, isn't ripping off Led Zeppelin, they're continuing their legacy. They are bearing the torch for a sound and an energy that has been missing from the mainstream for decades. This is maybe the most compelling part of the Hope argument. In an era with a distinct lack of new, larger-than-life rock bands, Greta Van Fleet has stepped in to fill that void. They're definitely a gateway band for a younger generation of kids, for Gen Z kids who are discovering the thrill of a wailing guitar solo and a thunderous drum fill for the first time. Maybe someday those kids will get introduced to acts like Led Zeppelin. Greta Van Fleet's popularity is a point against those people like Gene Simmons, who has declared that their genre is dead. For their fans, the Zeppelin comparison isn't a criticism, it's the entire point. It's not that they sound like a classic rock band, it's that they are a classic rock band just born 50 years too late. So you've got these two narratives that just can't seem to meet in the middle. On one side, a derivative, unoriginal clone profiting from the past. On the other, a talented group of young musicians single-handedly reviving rock and roll for a new era. The truth, as it often does, likely lies somewhere in the messy, complicated middle. The debate around Greta Van Fleet forces one to really ask a fundamental question. Where is the line between influence and imitation? And in the 21st century, does it really even matter anymore? Every artist is a product of their environment, a sum of their inspirations, and rock and roll, by its very nature, is a genre built on borrowed parts and ideas. The blues, folk, country, and soul all bled into one another to create the sound we now call classic rock. And maybe the intensity of this whole debate says more about the state of rock music than it does about Greta Van Fleet themselves. For nearly 2 decades, the music world has been defined by a vacuum. The old gods of the Zeppelins, the Floyds, and the Queens, well, they're gone. And no new bands have truly risen to take their place. The genre has become fragmented, pushed to the margins, and in this context, Greta Van Fleet's emergence felt like a seismic event. And for those who believe rock's glory days are over, the band is a painful reminder of what's been lost. They represent a failure of imagination, proof that the genre can now only look backwards, cannibalizing its own past. The sound isn't a progress, it's a feedback loop, an echo in an empty hull. But for those who have been desperately waiting for a savior, for a band that isn't afraid of big riffs, epic solos, and an unapologetic bombast, Greta Van Fleet arrived like an answer to a prayer. The familiarity of their sound wasn't a bug, it was a feature. It was comforting, powerful, dose of something that has been dangerously in short supply. Even the band themselves have kind of evolved in how they respond to the criticism. In early interviews, they acknowledged the influence, with Josh Kiska admitting, obviously we hear the similarity, but as that narrative threatened to completely define them, their stance changed. In 2019, Kiska told Rolling Stone, okay, we've acknowledged that, let's move on. Later, guitarist Jake Kiska framed the intense reactions, both positive and negative, as a good thing, stating that art is supposed to elicit strong reactions. He also promised that the band would continue to evolve and avoid becoming stagnant. And to their credit, the later albums like The Battle at Garden's Gate and Starcatcher saw them expanding their sound, incorporating more psychedelic and progressive rock elements, even if the core DNA was still there. The reviews for these later albums, while still mixed, did acknowledge that the band was at least attempting to carve out its own space. So where does that leave us? Rock's biggest ripoff or its only hope? Maybe the answer is both. They're a band that happens to possess immense talent and a rare electrifying connection with a massive audience. Maybe they're the symptom of a genre running on fumes, but also the spark that could ignite a new fire. Who knows? Ultimately, the phenomenon of Greta Van Fleet holds a mirror up to the world of rock music. It reveals our anxieties about originality, our deep-seated nostalgia, and our desperate search for the next generation of heroes. They are a band we are arguing about because, for the first time in a long time, there is a new rock band worth arguing about. They have forced their way into the conversation. But what do you guys think? Are they talented musicians carrying on a noble tradition, or are they a glorified tribute act that just got lucky? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And that brings us to the end of today's video, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in Rock Culture Stories. Take care.